21. Your teachers and you. Hey Alex. So far, the letters I've been writing about how you should approach studying law have focused on the work you'll be doing in your own time. Reading textbooks and cases, looking at statutes, making notes on articles, and using the internet. This letter will be about how to get the most out of the guidance and teaching you receive in the form of lectures and small group teaching sessions. A preliminary point. Before I get on to that, I want to emphasize one point. I once read somewhere that the difference between school and university is that at school you are a pupil and at university you are a student. Pupils learn by being taught, while students learn by studying by finding out things for themselves. The distinction holds especially true of law students, as I said in a previous letter. Law is probably the most self-taught subject that you can study at university. So you shouldn't rely too much on lectures and small group teaching sessions as a vehicle for finding out about the law. We should rather regard lectures and small group teaching sessions as providing you with opportunities to pick up useful tidbits of information and to test out your blossoming legal skills. But you mustn't misunderstand me. I don't want to encourage you to skip lectures and the small group teaching sessions that have been laid on for you. While they are not an essential component of your legal education, they provide a very useful service that you should take full advantage of. But please remember that it is how much work you put in on your own or in conjunction with your fellow students that will determine how well you do in your exams, not how many lectures you have been to. If you are spending 60% of your working time as a law student at lectures and small group teaching sessions, and only 40% of the remaining time working on your own or with your fellow students, then you are in trouble. You are not giving yourself enough of an opportunity to develop as a law student by working away at the law yourself, rather than having it spoon-fed to you by your teachers. A healthier distribution of your working time that you should aim for is spend 70% of your working time studying on your own or with your fellow students, and only 30% of your time attending lectures or small group teaching sessions. Lectures. Okay, let's get on with some guidance as to what you should be doing in lectures. Basically, you should be looking to make notes of points that will make useful additions to your secondary materials and your cases and statutes files. So keep your ears open for 1. Summaries of cases. These can be really useful, particularly if the lecturer is talking about a case which is very difficult to understand. Lecturers will usually work really hard to make cases comprehensible to the students that they are lecturing to, if only because it's really embarrassing for a lecturer to speak to an audience that is looking at her with blank incomprehension. If a lecturer is explaining a case and some aspect of his or her explanation seems particularly obscure, do not hesitate to stick your hand up and ask him to express himself more clearly. Some lecturers don't like to be interrupted by questions. But you shouldn't care about that. Your lecturers are working for you, not the other way around. If you want to ask a question, you have a right to ask it and have it answered. Having said that, if you start asking too many and too obscure questions, you should also remember that your fellow students also have a right to hear what the lecturer has to say without unnecessary interruptions. 2. Summaries of articles. Again, these are very useful. A really good summary of what an article says can make the actual article a breeze to read through subsequently. I should emphasize that if an article has been summed up very effectively in a lecture, I wouldn't advise skipping the article in your subsequent reading, on the basis that you already know what it says. However effective the summary, it is only a summary, and there may be more in the actual article that you may find worth taking a note on, perhaps a summary of a case or an interesting argument. 3. Evaluations of the law. It is always useful to note what your lecturer thinks of a particular area of the law and what arguments she makes in support of her views. 4. Aids to remembering cases. You should also be looking to take notes on any storylines that you can make use of to remember a string of cases, following the advice I gave you in my letters on reading cases and looking at statutes. So make notes of any general principles that the lecturer has identified as underlying a number of cases, or any speculations that the lecturer has as to why a number of cases were decided the way they were. You shouldn't be looking to make notes on the following. 1. Statements of basic legal rules. Suppose your lecturer says, a defendant will have the mens rea of murder if he has an intention to kill or an intention to cause grievous bodily harm. There's absolutely no point in your making a note of that. Your textbook reading will tell you that, so why wear out your hand trying to scribble this piece of information down in the middle of the lecture? It would be better to put your pen down and give your hand a rest and wait for the lecturer to tell you something that you won't necessarily find in a textbook. This takes me on to a more general point. If your lecturer on a particular subject is consistently not telling you anything that you couldn't find in a textbook, then you should consider stopping going to his or her lectures. This is for a very simple reason. You can read faster than your lecturer can talk. So you would make better use of the hour that the lecture will last reading a textbook rather than attending the lecture. You will find out more in that hour by reading the textbook than you will by attending the lecture. 2. History. Lecturers often like to preface their discussion of a particular area of law with a quick run-through of the history of that area. So, for example, if you are being lectured by your tort law lecturer on the law on occupiers' liability, he may well spend a bit of time talking about what the law said before the Occupiers' Liability Acts of 1957 and 1984 were enacted. Making notes on this is a complete waste of time. You are interested in what the law says now, not in what it said 50 or 20 years ago. You are interested in what reforms should be made to the law as it is now, not in what reforms were made to the law as it was 50 or 20 years ago. Having said that, history does have its place. As I've said before, it can help you to remember a string of cases if you see them as part of some historical trend or pattern. Arguments that a particular reform to the law has proved unsuccessful and that the law should return to where it was before that reform was implemented are always interesting and worth noting. But if the lecturer is talking about the history of a particular area of law, for no other reason than as a way of introducing that area of law, or because he or she is loath to abandon a set of carefully composed lecture notes that have been made completely redundant by a recent reform, then put your pen down and give yourself a rest. When a lecture is over, take the notes that you have made on the lecture and use them to make fresh notes in the appropriate places in your files of notes. This will serve a number of useful purposes. First, your lecture notes are likely to be quite scruffy and messy. Making fresh notes will mean you don't have to rely on your lecture notes. Secondly, making fresh notes will help you remember in the long term what was said in the lectures. Thirdly, making fresh notes will give you a chance to look over your lecture notes and see how many of the lecture notes you made actually seem, on reflection, worth entering into your files. If the answer is not many, you are taking too many notes in the lectures, and you need to be more discriminating in your note-taking. Small group teaching sessions. That's all I have to say about taking notes in lectures. What about small group teaching sessions? Any university will arrange for these to take place throughout the year, in parallel with the lectures, as a way of checking the progress you are making as a law student and giving you an opportunity to raise any concerns or questions that you might have about the subjects you are studying. The advice I can give you on these sessions is quite limited because I have no idea what format they will take. However, whatever format they take, the following advice should always hold good. 1. Be prepared. You won't get anything out of your small group teaching sessions if you aren't prepared for them. If you're not prepared for a small group teaching session, then it will turn into a small ordeal for you. You'll be lost, confused, and praying desperately that you aren't called upon to speak, and every minute of the session will seem like 10 minutes. Why put yourself through that kind of torture? Come prepared, and then you can make the most of the session and actually get something out of it. And if you're not prepared for whatever reason, it's far better to admit that and ask if you can come along to a later session than put yourself through the agony of sitting in the session, pretending to be better prepared than you are. 2. Ask questions. Try to take advantage of any small group teaching session that you attend to get whoever's holding the session to answer your questions about the area of law that you'll be focusing on in the session. So come to the teaching session armed with a list of questions that you want answered. Make sure you have actually got a list. Don't rely on your memory to tell you that you have such and such a question to ask. The pressure of a small group teaching session means that your memory will often fail you. 3. Take your books and notes along. That last point takes me on to a separate point. A small group teaching session isn't a memory test, so take your textbooks and your notes along to the session so that you can consult them in the course of a general discussion of a particular legal point. 4. Make notes. When I hold small group teaching sessions with first-year students, I notice that a lot of them don't take notes when I'm talking to them. This could be because they think that what I'm saying is rubbish. However, I find that hard to believe. More likely explanations are either they think that they'll be able to remember what I'm saying without making a note of it. Or Roman 2, they think that I'd be offended if they took my eyes off me and started writing in their notebook while I was talking. Neither of these things is true. Unless a student is blessed with an absolutely exceptional memory, he or she will not be able to remember very much of what was said in a small group teaching session unless he or she has made good notes of what was said. On Roman 2, there is no way any of your teachers will be offended if you make notes on what they are saying as they are saying it. They are far more likely to be offended if they make some really brilliant argument and their students just stare at them and don't make any notes to help them remember the pearls of wisdom that have just been scattered before them. As to what you should be making notes on, what I said in connection with lectures also applies here. You should be looking to make notes of points that will make useful additions to your topic and case files. And when the small group teaching session is over, you should take your notes and use them to enter a set of fresh notes at appropriate points in your topic and case files. 5. Exercise your right of freedom of speech. I've already made this point in an earlier letter, but I'll repeat it here. Do not be inhibited about speaking up in small group teaching sessions. If there is some point you are unclear on, do say, "I don't understand this, could you help me?" You're not going to get another opportunity to get some help on clearing up that point, so why not take advantage of it? Don't be put off asking a question because you think, "I'll look like an idiot if I ask about that." You probably won't. Your question is likely to be a really good one, and everyone else in your teaching group will profit from having your question answered. And even if you do look like an idiot, so what? It's good for you to make yourself look like an idiot once in a while. It'll stop you being arrogant, which is never an attractive quality. It'll make everyone else feel better about themselves. They'll think, "Oh, at least I'm not doing as badly as Alex." And it'll make everyone else feel a bit more comfortable about asking questions themselves. They'll think, "Well, it might be a bit embarrassing to ask this question, but at least I won't be as embarrassed as badly as Alex was." 6. Make the most of the opportunities that small group teaching sessions give you. Suppose that you are being taken for small group teaching sessions in a particular area of law by Professor White, who is a renowned scholar in that area of law. Use your time with Professor White to get her to talk about her views, not only her views about the area of law she specializes in, but also her views of what other academics have to say about that area of law. Suppose alternatively that you'll be expected to submit an essay in advance of a particular small group teaching session with Professor Black. The session will then be used to talk about people's essays and how they might be improved. Try to make your essay the best it can possibly be so you can take full advantage of any feedback you will get from Professor Black in the session on how your essay might have been improved. Don't come up with an average piece of work which will be returned to you with some really obvious criticisms that even you knew could be made of your essay. Again, suppose that in a small group teaching session with Professor Green, you'll be considering what the law says in a particular fact situation. Prepare well for the session by thinking of as many points as you can that might be made about that situation. Then in the session, make those points and learn from what Professor Green has to say about them. Also use the opportunity provided by the small group session to get some guidance from Professor Green about how one should approach the task of writing about problem situations in the exams. What are the examiners looking for you to do? What are they not looking for you to do? Remember that the more you put into a small group teaching session, the more you will get out of it. Even if you are being taught by an academic who has zero interest in teaching you, he or she will not fail to respond to the interest you show in getting the most out of your session with him or her. He or she will soon warm up and start giving of his or her best to you. 7. Be nice. This is a point that I've made before, but I'll make it again. Be warm, bubbly, and enthusiastic in your small group teaching sessions. No one enjoys teaching a surly or uncommunicative student, and even the most dedicated teacher will soon lose interest in doing anything for you if you persistently come to his or her small group sessions with a bad attitude. Of course, if you're feeling down on a particular day when you have a small group teaching session, it's okay to make that clear. But your normal attitude in going into a small group teaching session should be positive, friendly, and outgoing. That's enough advice from me. Hope your studies are going well. Keep in touch. I hope you'll let me know how you are getting on. All best wishes, Nick.